The Wolf Battalion moved under a sky that seemed endless and heavy, as if the darkness itself was pressing down upon them. The air was cold, sharp, and bitter, each breath turning into mist that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The men were silent, not because they had nothing to say, but because words felt useless in the presence of such weight. They had been here before on missions that did not exist on paper, missions that no politician would ever admit, missions that lived only in whispers and rumors. Yet something about this night felt different. Something about the silence made their hearts beat harder against their chests. They walked in tight formation, every soldier aware that one mistake could turn the shadows against them, boots pressed into the earth with steady rhythm, a rhythm that reminded them of their brotherhood forged in the heat of wars where survival was never promised. Their weapons hung heavy across their backs. But it was not the weight of steel that troubled them, it was the feeling of unseen eyes following their every step. The forest around them was too still. No animal moved, no wind stirred the branches, only silence stretched across the path. The commander marched at the front, his face carved from stone, his eyes fixed forward. He had led them through fire before, he had seen men fall beside him, and still kept marching, but even he could feel it tonight, a tension in the air so sharp it felt like it could cut through skin. He glanced once at the men behind him, their faces half hidden by the dark, yet each expression told the same story. They were prepared for battle, but they were also prepared for something more, something unknown that awaited them in the blackness ahead. One soldier at the back tightened his grip around his rifle, knuckles turning pale as he swallowed the rising fear in his throat. He had seen death before, but this night carried a taste. He had never known a strange chill that whispered of traps unseen and enemies yet unrevealed. Another soldier brushed his hand across the dirt as they paused for a moment, feeling the ground as if it could speak to him, but the earth gave no answer, only silence. The battalion pressed on, every step deeper into the night, every breath heavier than the last. They knew a mission awaited them, though no one truly understood what waited at its end. The silence grew louder, the air colder, the path narrower, until suddenly the commander raised his hand to halt the men, and in that instant they all felt it, a presence ahead, hidden in the darkness, waiting, watching, breathing closer with every second. The orders had arrived in fragments, carried through channels so secret that even the wolves themselves questioned who had truly spoken them. The message was simple: stop the enemy, strike before dawn, yet the details were shrouded in fog, nothing clear, nothing certain. The coordinates they were given pointed toward a valley far from the safety of familiar ground, a place where even maps seemed hesitant to draw lines. The men listened to the words of command. Yet, in the silence of their thoughts, each one wondered if the mission itself was a test or worse, a trap. The wolves had learned long ago that battles are rarely fought with clean truth. More often they walked into chaos, guided by rumors or whispers from men who had never set foot on the field. They survived because they trusted instinct and each other more than the words handed down to them. Now, as they advanced under the cloak of night, every instinct screamed of danger. The forest felt alive, as though the trees themselves leaned closer to hear the sound of boots against soil. The wind carried nothing but the scent of cold earth and a silence that threatened to choke the air. The commander repeated the orders in his head, yet even he could feel the weight of their emptiness. They were told an enemy prepared to strike, but not how many, not where they gathered, not the strength they held. Information was power, and without it they walked blind. Every step deeper into the night felt like pushing into a storm without knowing its size. The men followed without hesitation because they had no choice. Wolves did not question the hunt, they only moved forward together. A younger soldier whispered to the one beside him, his voice barely breaking the silence. He asked if the enemy even existed, or if this was just another ghost mission, one meant to keep them restless and bleeding without reason. The older soldier did not reply. He only kept his eyes ahead and tightened the grip on his weapon. His silence was answer enough. Doubt was poison, and poison spread quickly if given words. The younger man felt the truth sink in heavier than his rifle. Sometimes silence was the only shield against fear. As they drew closer to the valley, the air grew colder, the path narrower, shadows stretched longer across their boots, as if trying to pull them back. Yet the wolves pressed on. Their orders were vague, their knowledge broken, yet their duty unshaken. They moved with a rhythm that only brothers in arms could share. Each heartbeat carried them closer to the unknown, until the first faint sound echoed ahead, a sound that did not belong to the night. The wolves advanced deeper into the darkness, their boots striking the ground in a rhythm that grew heavier with every step. The silence was no longer empty, it was thick, pressing against their ears, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Not even the rustle of leaves could be heard, and that absence of sound weighed more heavily on the men than any gunfire could have. The air carried a strange chill, one that seeped into their bones and made their hands tighten on their weapons. The men had fought through storms, deserts, and ruined cities, yet never had they felt a silence so alive, so watchful. Each soldier knew that something was wrong, though no one dared to say it aloud. Doubts began to grow like shadows inside their minds, but they swallowed them down, trying to keep their steps steady. A few exchanged glances, brief and sharp, questioning if the orders they had received were leading them toward a battle or a slaughter. They had been deceived before, sent on missions where the truth had been twisted to suit hidden agendas, but this night felt more dangerous than anything they had faced before. It was not only the enemy that haunted them, it was the possibility that betrayal walked among them, wearing the same uniform and carrying the same rifle. The commander kept his gaze fixed forward, his jaw set like stone. He could feel the unease crawling through the ranks, though none spoke a word. His men trusted him, but trust was fragile in the dark, and tonight it trembled like a candle in the wind. He raised his fist once, signaling for silence, though none had spoken, and the wolves froze at once. Their breathing slowed, their senses sharpened, and for a moment they felt the pulse of the night around them. It was a pulse that did not belong to the earth, but to something hidden in the shadows. One soldier at the flank thought he saw movement, a flicker just beyond the tree line. He raised his rifle and aimed, but there was nothing there, only darkness stretching endlessly. He lowered the weapon slowly, yet his heart continued to race. Another soldier whispered a prayer under his breath, though the words vanished into the cold air, unheard by anyone but himself. The fear was spreading, not in shouts or cries, but in silence and glances and clenched fists. They all knew something was coming, though they did not know from where. The battalion pressed forward, each step heavier than the last. The darkness seemed to close in tighter, the path shrinking as if the world itself sought to trap them. Every instinct screamed at them to stop, yet their orders pushed them on until at last a faint sound stirred ahead, a sound that did not belong to wind or earth, a sound that promised the night was about to break. The lead scout moved ahead, slipping into the shadows with the silence of a predator. His steps were light, his breathing steady. He was the eyes of the wolves and their shield against the unseen. The men waited behind, watching him fade into the darkness until he was no longer visible. Only the faint outline of his movements lingered in memory. Then came the stillness, so sharp it pressed into their ears. They waited for his signal, a flash, a sound, anything that told them the path was clear, but the silence stretched far too long. Minutes passed, each one dragging slower than the last. The commander raised his hand for the unit to hold their ground. Every heartbeat felt like an echo against the still night. A soldier glanced at his watch. Though the numbers meant nothing, time moved differently in the dark. When no signal came, unease turned to dread. The wolves shifted slightly, weapons raised, eyes scanning the void ahead, yet the forest gave them nothing, no sound, no movement, no sign of their scout. Then it came, faint and distant, the sound of something breaking, a twig, a branch, maybe even bone. The men stiffened, weapons aimed toward the direction, but the noise vanished as quickly as it had come. Silence returned, thicker than before, wrapping itself around them like a shroud. The commander gave the signal to advance, slow and careful, yet each man felt the weight of uncertainty pressing harder. If the scout had fallen, they were already walking into danger. If he was alive, then why had he not returned? A young soldier whispered under his breath that maybe the scout had seen something too dangerous to signal about. His voice was shaky, his eyes wide. The man beside him told him to be silent, but the thought had already settled into their minds. If the path ahead was compromised, then every step forward was another step into a trap, yet retreat was never an option for wolves. They moved only forward, even if forward led them into fire. As they pressed on, the men felt the night grow colder. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer. Every tree seemed to lean closer. The silence was suffocating, and their breaths sounded too loud in their own ears. They followed their commander, trusting him to lead, though even his face was set tighter than usual. His eyes scanned the dark with a sharpness that betrayed his worry ahead. The path seemed to narrow into a tunnel of trees, and the wolves knew the moment they entered it, they would either find their scout or find the enemy waiting in the dark. The commander halted the wolves at the mouth of the narrow path, his hand raised in silence. His eyes swept the treeline, searching for anything that betrayed the night, yet nothing moved, nothing stirred. The men stood still, their rifles ready, their hearts pounding louder than footsteps. The commander finally lowered his hand and spoke in a voice so low it was barely above a whisper, reminding them that fear is always the first enemy and hesitation is the second. His words were steady, carved from years of battle, yet even as he spoke, the tension in his jaw revealed the weight pressing upon him. The wolves nodded their heads silently, their eyes sharp, yet within each of them something darker had begun to grow. Doubt crept into their thoughts like smoke, filling every corner. Was the missing scout captured? Was he killed? Was he the one who had led them into a trap? No answers came, only the endless silence that offered no comfort. A soldier clenched his rifle tighter, his knuckles turning white as he remembered missions in the past where betrayal had destroyed more men than bullets. He knew the wolves were strong, but strength meant little if trust was broken. Another soldier scanned the faces of his brothers, searching for signs of unease. His gaze lingered longer on one man whose eyes refused to meet his own. Suspicion stirred but he swallowed it down, knowing too well that suspicion spoken aloud could fracture them faster than any ambush. The bond that held them together was their only weapon, sharper than any blade. If it cracked, they would not survive the night. The commander signaled to advance, but slower this time, each step cautious, measured, as if the ground itself could turn against them. The wolves obeyed, moving like shadows, yet the silence among them was not the silence of discipline, it was the silence of doubt. Their eyes shifted not only to the trees but also to each other, watching, breathing, calculating. One soldier whispered so faintly that only the man beside him could hear, "What if we are already walking into the jaws of betrayal?" The man beside him did not answer. Instead he adjusted his weapon and kept walking. His silence spoke louder than words, because silence in the dark meant agreement. Silence meant he too felt the unease crawling beneath his skin. The wolves pushed deeper into the tunnel of trees, the shadows pressing tighter, the air growing colder. Each man walked with the certainty that danger was ahead, but uncertainty about where it would come from. With every step forward, they were not only walking into the unknown, they were walking into the growing fear that the true enemy might not be waiting ahead but walking quietly among them. The wolves emerged from the narrow tunnel of trees, and the ground opened into a valley that stretched wide under the shroud of night. They paused at the edge, crouched low, their eyes scanning the dark expanse before them. At first the valley seemed empty, only rocks and shadows, and the faint outline of hills in the distance. Then as their eyes adjusted, they began to see movement, shapes clustered in the dark, outlines of vehicles, weapons, and men, far more than the wolves had been told existed. The commander narrowed his eyes, his breath steady though his chest grew heavier with every passing second. The intelligence they had been given spoke of a small strike force, a handful of men preparing for a raid, yet what lay before them was no small force. It was an army waiting like a beast crouched before the kill. Tents stretched across the valley, lights faintly glowing beneath covers, weapons mounted in rows as if prepared for war. The wolves counted quickly, and the numbers were impossible to ignore. They were outnumbered beyond measure. A soldier muttered under his breath, his voice trembling with the weight of realization. "This was not what we were told." Another answered with a growl of frustration, his fists clenched as if gripping rage more tightly than his weapon. They had been deceived. The truth of it burned in every mind. The wolves had been sent not to strike but to be swallowed whole. The commander studied the valley, his mind racing through possibilities. Retreat was not an option, their orders were absolute, but to charge head-on was madness. The only chance was to move with precision, strike where the enemy was weakest, and turn the chaos into survival. Yet, even as he thought, the question of betrayal gnawed at him. Had their scout discovered this truth before being silenced? Had someone fed them lies to lure them into a grave? Another soldier scanned the faces of his brothers, and the thought returned heavy and unshakable. What if the enemy was not only in the valley but within their own ranks? The silence between the men grew heavier than the dark around them. Suspicion was poison, and poison spread faster than any fire. Yet they had no choice but to stand together, for the night had already chosen them. The wolves steadied themselves, weapons ready, eyes fixed on the valley below. They knew the dawn would come soon, and with it the strike that could reshape everything. Their mission had become far larger than a simple raid. It was no longer just about stopping an attack, it was about surviving the shadow of an army that was waiting patiently for them to make their move. Without warning, the night erupted in fire. The first crack of rifles split the silence like thunder, and the valley lit up with sudden bursts of light. The wolves scattered with precision, each man moving as instinct demanded, diving for cover behind rocks and fallen trees. Bullets hissed past them, tearing into the earth, sending shards of dirt and stone into the air. The ambush had come swiftly, mercilessly, and it was clear the enemy had been waiting for them long before they had arrived. The commander barked orders, his voice calm but sharp, cutting through the chaos. The wolves returned fire, their weapons roaring in unison, the flashes illuminating grim faces set in determination. They moved like a single creature, every man covering the other, every position shifting with flawless rhythm. Years of training spoke louder than fear, yet even training could not silence the truth. They were outnumbered, overwhelmed, and surrounded on all sides. One soldier fired until his rifle clicked empty, then reloaded with hands steady though his heart pounded like a drum. He glanced at the man beside him and saw blood streaked across his arm, yet the soldier kept fighting without pause. The wolves did not break, they fought like predators, cornered, snarling against the flood of enemies that seemed endless. Each time one enemy fell, two more rose from the dark. The sound of gunfire echoed through the valley like the growl of thunder refusing to end. The air grew thick with smoke, the acrid stench of gunpowder burning their lungs. The flashes of explosions lit the sky for seconds at a time, showing glimpses of countless enemies advancing closer. Every explosion seemed to draw the wolves deeper into chaos, but still they fought, pushing against the tide with every ounce of strength. Yet in the heart of the storm, realization struck. Many of the enemy movements were too precise, too coordinated. They seemed to know the wolves' every step, their cover positions, their timing, their retreat paths. It was not coincidence, it was not luck. The enemy was fighting with knowledge that could only have come from inside. The commander felt the truth claw at him, even as he fired another round through the dark. Someone among the wolves had betrayed them. Someone had whispered their movements to the enemy, and guided them straight into this valley of fire. The thought burned hotter than the bullets tearing past him, but there was no time to uncover the traitor, not while survival demanded every breath. The wolves pressed harder, their rifles blazing, their roars echoing through the night. They would not surrender, they would not kneel. Yet deep within each man, a single thought took root as the battle raged on. If betrayal lived among them, then the true fight was not only against the enemy outside, but against the shadows hidden within their own brotherhood. The battle raged on, and the wolves fought with the fury of men who refused to die quietly, but the chaos revealed more than blood and fire. In the flickering light of gunfire, some noticed one of their own moving strangely. His shots never found the enemy, his signals were out of rhythm, his steps guiding the unit into open ground where bullets rained heavier. Suspicion turned into certainty, and whispers spread like wildfire. Even in the roar of battle, someone among them was not fighting as a wolf, but as a shadow for the enemy. The commander caught sight of the soldier, and his stomach tightened like iron. He wanted to confront him, but hesitation in battle was a wound that killed faster than bullets. He had to keep the wolves alive. He had to focus on survival, yet the thought burned with every heartbeat. Was this the traitor who had fed their movements to the enemy? Was this the reason the ambush was perfect? The commander forced the question into silence for the moment, but he knew it would not stay buried for long. A wounded soldier crawling across the dirt hissed through clenched teeth that he had seen the man giving signals not to the wolves but toward the enemy ridge. Another heard the words, and the poison of doubt spread through him too. Each pair of eyes that turned toward their brother carried not trust but suspicion, and once suspicion was born, it grew stronger than fire. The wolves were bound by loyalty, yet now that bond strained under the weight of betrayal. The accused soldier fired again, his bullet striking nothing but empty space. He shouted something that was drowned by the roar of explosions, but his brothers were no longer listening. Their minds were already at war with questions. Was he truly one of them, or had he been planted long before the mission began? The thought tore at them more savagely than the bullets around them. Still, the fight demanded their strength, and the wolves did not falter. They reloaded, they fired, they pushed forward with everything they had, for the enemy was closing in like a tightening noose. But in the corners of their minds, the traitor's shadow loomed. Every glance exchanged filled with doubt. Every man now carried two enemies, the one in front with rifles and fire, and the one within their ranks wearing the same uniform. The wolves knew the night would not last forever, and dawn was creeping closer, yet the light of morning promised no peace. It promised the truth, and the truth would demand blood, whether it came from the enemy ahead or from the traitor among them. The wolves knew that before dawn one of their own would fall. The wolves regrouped in the cover of broken rocks, their breaths heavy, their faces streaked with dirt, sweat, and blood. The valley burned with scattered fires, the night sky lit by the glow of explosions. The commander crouched low, his rifle steady as his eyes swept across his men. He could see exhaustion carved into their faces, but he also saw something stronger than exhaustion. He saw defiance. He saw the fire that made them wolves, unbroken even when surrounded, even when betrayed. He spoke quietly, his words carried by the sharpness of his tone rather than its volume. He reminded them that dawn was close, and with it came the enemy strike that would decide everything. If they failed, the valley would not only bury them but open the gates for destruction far beyond their sight. Cities would burn, families would fall, lives they would never meet would be lost because they could not hold their ground. His words struck deep, and the men tightened their grips on their weapons, not as soldiers obeying orders, but as brothers swearing silently to one another. Yet behind their silent suspicion still lingered the shadow of betrayal, crawled among them like smoke. They knew one of their own had guided the enemy, and each glance carried the weight of doubt. Still they pressed it down, burying it beneath the urgency of survival, because to fracture now meant certain death. They would face the traitor, but only after they lived through the fire of the valley. The wolves had no luxury to fight two battles at once. The commander pointed toward the ridge where the enemy fire had slowed. He explained the plan quickly, a final push before dawn, a strike fierce enough to break the enemy line and scatter their formation. If they could wound the beast before it rose with the sun, they might have a chance to survive, and even when it was a gamble, a desperate one, but desperation was the only card left in their hands. The wolves nodded, no hesitation in their eyes, for hesitation was already a corpse buried in the dirt of this night. They moved into position, weapons loaded, hearts steady, breathing in unison. The silence before the storm returned, thick, heavy, almost unbearable. Each man felt it, the moment that separates life from death, the stillness where choices are carved into history. Then the commander raised his hand, and in that instant they all understood this was not just another mission, it was the battle that would define the wolves forever. The first light of dawn brushed the horizon, faint and cold. The wolves braced for their final charge, knowing the moment they rose from cover everything would be decided and nothing would ever be the same again. The first light of dawn stretched across the valley, painting the battlefield in pale gold, but the wolves saw no beauty in it. For them dawn was not peace, it was the final hour. The commander raised his hand, and the wolves rose as one, their silhouettes sharp against the fire and smoke of the night. They charged forward with the roar of men who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. The valley erupted again, rifles cracking, explosions shaking the earth, yet the wolves moved through it like predators unleashed. Every step was a defiance against death. Bullets tore past them, striking stone, striking flesh, but the wolves did not falter. One fell, then another, yet those still standing pressed harder. Their formation was ragged, but their spirit unbroken. They surged into the enemy line, weapons blazing, eyes locked with the fury of men determined to carve their story into the earth before it claimed them. The enemy recoiled at the ferocity, for they had expected prey and instead found predators with fire in their veins. In the chaos, the truth emerged. The soldier who had betrayed them broke from cover. His weapon turned not against the enemy, but against his brothers. The betrayal was no longer shadow, it was flesh and blood. The wolves saw him, and rage greater than fear gripped them. A shot rang out, not from the enemy, but from one of their own, and the traitor fell into the dust, his silence louder than the roar of the battle. His death did not end the fight, but it sealed the bond of the wolves, for betrayal was purged in blood. The battle raged through the rising sun, the wolves fighting with every ounce of strength left in them, until the valley was nothing but smoke, screams, and silence. When the final shot faded, only a handful remained standing, their bodies broken, but their spirit unyielding. They had faced an army, they had faced betrayal, they had faced death itself, and yet they still stood breathing beneath the new light of day. The commander lowered his rifle, his eyes sweeping the battlefield. He knew the price had been unbearable, yet he also knew the wolves had done what no other could. They had stopped the strike, they had turned shadows into ashes, they had carved loyalty and sacrifice into the soil of the valley. As the sun rose higher, the wolves stood silent, not in triumph, but in remembrance, for the night had taken brothers, yet left behind a truth that would never fade. The Wolf Battalion had survived the shadows before dawn, but they knew that those shadows would haunt them forever.